Welcome to the Get Fit Guys, quick and dirty tips to slim down and shape up. My name is Ben Greenfield, and I'm the Get Fit Guy. Last year, I did an episode called How Much Should Kids Exercise?, in which I stated that although children don't need a lot of intense physical activity to get the health benefits of exercise, at least 7 minutes of exercise per day is the minimum necessary to prevent weight gain, obesity, and chronic health risks. But two recent occurrences involving kids and exercise got me thinking. So, the first thing that got me thinking about children and exercise is that my friend Joe DeSena, the CEO of Spartan Racing, told me that his 8-year-old boy had just completed a 50K race and had also run the Boston Marathon, along with a variety of other very impressive and grueling feats of endurance. And the second thing is a recently published magazine article in The Atlantic entitled, How Far is Too Far for Kids to Run? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge advocate of increasing physical activity in children. I talked about this in a previous episode called How to Get Kids Fit, and I'll link to all of the episodes and the links that I talk about today over at quickanddirtytips.com. Just go there and do a search for episode number 207. And I also recently spoke at the 431 Project, which you can check out at the431project.com, about ways that we can combat childhood obesity and get kids more active. But how much is too much for kids to exercise? Well, while many children are still sitting around playing video games, other children are now exercising in extremely high volumes, with an increasing number of young athletes training for and competing in long-distance endurance events like triathlons, obstacle races, adventure races, and marathons. Injury and growth reduction potential risks aside, this may actually increase the propensity for those same active kids to eventually quit exercising, which I know sounds ironic, but the 2011 National Athletic Training Association's position statement sums this up quite nicely. They say, athletes who sustain recurrent overuse injuries may stop participating in sports and recreational activities, thus potentially adding to the already increasing number of sedentary individuals and the obesity epidemic. Well, we certainly don't want that to happen. So let's look at how kids should run and how kids should lift weights. Well, running is a particular culprit in this case because, as a study that I'll link to in the show notes shows, children's bodies, particularly their bones, joints, and soft tissue, just don't absorb the impact of running as well as adults. Another study shows that children have different running biomechanics and a smaller leg to body size ratio, which can lower their body's ability to absorb impact. And although it has yet to be definitively proven by science, as there are obvious ethical issues with a controlled study that forces kids to pound the pavement, repeated impact to immature joints could potentially cause injuries to joint cartilage or separation of growth plates, which can lead to lifelong joint pain, stunted growth, or both. Well, the Atlantic article that I mentioned earlier cites the Clinical Journal of Sports Medicine as saying, training to run in a marathon, which is more than 8 times the usual cross-country competitive racing distance, is an inappropriate activity for children and adolescents. Well, perhaps this is one reason the Boston Marathon sets a minimum age limit of 18 years old for participation. Now, ultimately, every parent can make their own decision on this, but when it comes to running, I let my kids run as much as they want. But I don't actually sign them up for any events that might require them to pound the pavement for hours on end to simply reach the finish line because of peer pressure or extrinsic motivation. I believe that the cons in that case potentially outweigh the pros. Now, instead, I encourage my kids to participate in sports and events that require brief bursts of physical activity, like soccer or tennis, or longer bursts of activity that aren't extremely energy depleting, like 1-mile-long obstacle races such as a kid's Spartan race, or children's distance triathlons, or even a run-walk style 5K. Now, how about weight training? When it comes to weight training, it can be a different story altogether. And as an excellent article from exrx.net that I'll link to in the show notes says, strength and power increases with proper weight training, even in kids. Neuromuscular coordination improvement in children has also been linked to repetitive practice of a specific skill, and that includes weight training. And finally, weight training is simply measured subjectively and scaled according to a child's own strength, unless they're competing in a powerlifting competition. And this simply means that weight training is an activity that may be more suitable for children's participation compared to sports where success is measured by victory, defeat, or crossing a finish line. Well, research shows that children can weight train for up to 15 hours per week with no deleterious effect to their hormones, growth plates, or health. And now you have a great excuse to get your kids out in the backyard to build that rock wall. Or, as in my case, I spent 6 hours with my kids yesterday chopping down trees with a chainsaw, sectioning them into pieces, and my kids simply hoisted those heavy logs back to the house. And that type of activity is fine for a kid. Now, based on this, I didn't personally begin hoisting 10-pound dumbbells until I was 13 years old. But my 6-year-old twin boys not only joined me in household chores like I just described, but they also joined me in our weight room with their own tiny dumbbells, kettlebells, and medicine balls, and I let them carry and lift heavy objects as much as their heart pleases, while of course being careful to teach them proper lifting form to protect their little backs and joints. Now, the only caveat to this is that science has yet to prove that utilization of maximal weights is safe. Maximal weight is anything that a child can only feasibly lift one time, such as a heavy 1-rep max barbell squat or deadlift. And this is why, again, I don't think that weightlifting competitions are a good idea for a child who hasn't finished growing yet. Well, ultimately, my take on children's exercise is this. Let your kids lift heavy objects, move all day long, and sprint as much as they want, but be careful about putting them into activities that require chronic, repetitive motion for hours on end. The research doesn't yet show that this is safe for children, and frankly, they'll have plenty of time to run marathons and do Ironman triathlons after they've gone through puberty. Well, if you have more questions about how much kids should exercise, or if you disagree with me, or you'd like to join in on the discussion, then head over to facebook.com/getfitguy. And until next time, I'm Ben Greenfield, the Get Fit Guy, asking you, what are you waiting for? Go get fit.